Hi, everybody. Welcome to Be Moved, an interview series where I, Suzanne Astar, get to interview some of the people that have inspired me the most to make healthy, momentum-building, positive changes. And these aren't little things. This is like how I changed the way I think, how I changed the way I behave. And this beautiful woman who's next to me, Radiant Rebecca, or Rebecca Beltran, they're interchangeable, but we like Radiant Rebecca, has been one of those people that has been in my life and has, it's really been a healing exchange, I would say. We've shared some ideas and some movement together. I came into her life as a movement teacher, a Pilates teacher, sharing some of the bodywork knowledge. And Rebecca came into my life as a thought leader, as an independent thinker, and someone that I could always sense, you can see in her little smile that there's something behind, that she's like a little secret that she's keeping close to her, but one that really works. So I think the reason why she's called Radiant is because you actually are emanating something from deep inside that, can't be faked. And so today we get to tap into some of the secrets that I know that you're sharing these days because you're doing more public speaking.
Yes.
So, yes, you are. So welcome, Miss Rebecca.
Thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
It's my pleasure. So I want to take us to the moment that inspired this whole conversation. You actually had made a lovely connection with a gentleman, and we were talking about what was new in our lives, as we do. I said, well, what's on your mind these days? And you said love, which surprised me because you are an entrepreneur. And to me, you're a beautiful woman, and I love that about you, but I also so value that you can get in and change, you do work on the computer, you help people with consulting. So you have a lot of those masculine elements mastered. But to put that right next to love, to me, felt like this incredible inspiration. Like, who in business is thinking about love? You are. You are. So I'd love to talk to you about the progression from working in a very technical way and thinking about how to do great in business to now thinking about how love is actually a really smart move for you when you consider your business dealings or the way you construct your presentation to the world.
Well, to me, that answer is as simple as like attracts like. So it's a law of attraction at its basis, that whatever you put into something is what you get back. So when I take a system or a platform or whatever it is that I'm building in the entrepreneurial world and business, and I find the nuggets within it to appreciate, and that turns me on to that space of love, to that vibration of pure positive energy, then it shifts how that project goes. Always. It always does. So I think being in love with whatever you're doing and whoever you're doing it with is one of the most efficient and powerful ways to do business.
Okay. Well, here's a fun question. I know that you do law of attraction work. And could you describe to people that don't know, I know it's super, super popular these days. A lot of people have an idea of what the law of attraction is or have heard about it in particular through the Abraham channelings or Esther and Jerry Hicks' books or, live seminars. But I'm really curious how you describe it to someone who'd never heard of it before.
Describe the law of attraction?
Yes.
Like attracts like. I think it's as simple as that. Whatever energy that you're putting out, emitting, and we are all energy producing beings. That's how our planet and our world happens. So whatever energy that you have, that you're holding within yourself, that you're putting into this space between you and whoever you're spending time with, is going to affect what shows up and what your experience is. And sometimes that's easier to control than others, but I think it's always worth looking at and always paying attention to what your vibration is as you're going into something new, or as you're creating a new project or a new deal with someone. Understanding what that energy is and what you're putting into it will help you understand what you're going to get back and help you fine tune it as well. So if you are thinking of this new project feels really exciting, but there's this one piece of it that feels heavy, recognizing that, knowing that like attracts like, and going, well, if I don't want some of this project to feel heavy, how am I going to shift that before we get into it? And it's always easiest to do it before you get into it rather than after. But that's how I describe it. Like attracts like.
So say, this is really interesting information to me, because we live in a really complex time, where we could be in a loving relationship but have difficult parts of the relationship, or be in a job that we like parts of it but don't like other parts, because sometimes we don't get to experience a full yes all the time. And by the way, I'll ask you about full yeses. But when we are in those moments of complexity and feel like something difficult, deal with something before, ahead of time.
One more time, please.
How do you do something that feels difficult before, ahead of time?
How do you fine tune something that feels difficult ahead of time? Mm-hmm. Pay attention to what about it feels difficult. Is there a person that feels difficult? Is it the method? Yeah, so for me, it's a process of inquiry and usually journaling, because when I journal, I write out my thoughts and then I can see them, and I can see, oh, well, that's a ridiculous thought. Why was I thinking that? Or I can say, oh, that points exactly to the one piece that needs to be tweaked. And if I tweak that, then the whole thing is going to feel better again. So it's that asking yourself the question of what doesn't feel good here. And if I had it on my way, what would it feel like? Or what would it look like? Because those are your clues.
Mm-hmm. So I know a little bit about some of the things you're passionate about, because I think they're interesting, and I found them to be beneficial. And one of them is EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique. You do a really specific one called Faster EFT,
yes,
which is really interesting to me. I have done some with it, and I have done regular EFT as well. But could you talk a little bit about your how you have discovered EFT, and in particular, do you feel like that's your way of, oh, I found a negative thought, that's the way I'm going to, help that thought before I get into a situation that might otherwise be difficult?
Yes and no. So I think I don't tend to do it on a thought by thought basis, because that can get a bit nutty. You're tapping all the time, and that's good. It's good to tap all the time, but you can't do it for your entire life. So I tend to tap a lot before and after I do retreats and workshops, and tap daily the rest of the time, so that I'm still doing the work, but I'm not trying to find every single thought that's a stray thought and tear it out, right? Because there's a little bit of unhealthy maybe addiction in that, in saying, that's not a good feeling thought, I've got to go and find it and rip it out. Because honestly, we will all have some thoughts that feel better and some thoughts that don't. That's just how the mind works. It's a tool, and it's not us. So when we remember that, then we can allow ourselves to distance our self-esteem and our being from every single thought that we think. And then it's not a big deal when you think a thought that doesn't feel good. You just go, oh, that was a good feeling thought. All right, so what's the better feeling thought? It doesn't have to be a full-on tapping session when you think something that doesn't feel good. But when I find something that's a recurring pattern, especially, or when I'm preparing to do something that I'm thinking is going to be a big, like a big event, or I'm going on vacation, or I'm going to see someone in particular and I'm nervous about it, then I will tap until I feel excited. And that's something that I've learned from Odile with Faster EFT. Tap until you feel amazing. And it always makes a big difference. So.
Wow. So that's really helpful to have it as like a supplement in your life to set your nervous system or your mind. I've often thought about tapping as, when I have done it, about allowing your nervous system to register the distinction between what doesn't feel good and does feel good, so that you can actually really resonate with and track and actually see and follow what does feel good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit, which is an interesting question, with the law of attraction, because we sometimes with the law of attraction, I've noticed, if like attracts like, we don't want to focus too negatively at all. Like, we don't want to complain too much or get stuck in, negative patterns. But when you do see, like, say, a negative pattern in your life, supposedly, what do you do, for example, when you see other people suffering, right? People in your life that are going through a hard time, and you can see it, and you're with them. Like, how do you deal with that?
Personally, I let them have their own container to figure it out. And if they ask for help, I happily help. To me, in my past experience, it's pretty difficult and rather empowering to have someone come up and say, I can see you're struggling and I want to fix you. So I stay away from that. I let them ask for help first. And if someone wants help, I'm happy to help, to do whatever I can. But at the same time, I think the most healing thing is to let them have their space and let them figure it out, because they will. We all have the same guidance system. We all get that hit of, this doesn't feel right and this feels better, and this doesn't feel right and this feels better. And I cannot possibly know what is the next step for them better than their inner being knows what is the next step for them. So by me coming in and saying, I'm going to come and save the day for you, that doesn't help them and it doesn't help me, because now all of a sudden I've taken responsibility for someone who I don't have full control over their thoughts. And that is something that will always backfire on you. If you say, I feel responsible for this person and how good they feel, or whether or not they have made it through their shit, but I can't force them to think anything in particular, because that's not how it works, well, then you're up, I was going to say up shit creek without a paddle, but that might be a little extreme. You set yourself up for something that is eventually not going to feel good.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to love, what if you learned that love is and what isn't love?
Ooh, great question. First of all, the word love gets used a lot in our culture, and it means a lot of different things. And personally, I think of the purest definition of love as being that high-flying vibration, that space of total appreciation, that there's no negativity in that vibe. It's just pure compassion, understanding, honoring, etc., acceptance. And when I talk about love, that's what I mean. But there are also people that say love hurts, right? That's a pretty famous song, Love Hurts. Except that thing that I just described, that high, pure, positive vibration, that is never going to hurt, right? That always feels good. What the song is talking about, and what a lot of our other cultural references about love is talking about, are either the chemical bonds that happen around about the time when we fall in love, or the belief that love is going to leave, and that's the pain. It's not the loving that's the pain, it's the fact that we might not have it anymore, right? That's the pain. It's that fear of loss of love that hurts.
Right, and Brené Brown talks about that when she talks about vulnerability, how most people's nervous systems or minds starts planning the losing of things when we have something great.
Yeah.
We already start anticipating, just so we know we're going to be okay. We do a run through of the worst thing that could happen.
Right.
and that's a really interesting part of the mind, right? So that we get used to feeling something really good, and then all of a sudden we're planning to make sure that when we do feel bad about losing it, that we're going to be okay, do a run through. Have you noticed yourself doing that at all when you reach some of these higher states? Or do you feel, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. And that's when I start with faster EFT, because when you think about it logically, you realize that's really quite silly. It should be an ever upward swing, right? And so when it's not, then there's a program there, there's a filter there that's running that is keeping me from seeing clearly enough to take advantage of that swing.
Why should it be an ever upward swing? If waves, exist on the ocean, and sound is a wave, and a lot of us experience waves of emotion, why should we go up continually?
Not that there won't be variation in the ever upward swing, but that is because well-being is the core of the universe. That's all there is. There isn't any source of evil necessarily. There's pinching off of the well-being. There's holding it away from you. But when you're in a state of allowing, when you're in a state of love, even things that would normally be awful or horrible or create a lot of negative emotion in you, they'll still generate that negative emotion, but it's not something that you have to live in and stay in. Oh, I think one of the things that's a common misunderstanding about emotions is that we are our emotions, and we're not. That our emotions are just energy that's passing through our bodies. If we let it pass through our bodies, it will. And I've found and been taught by other people that an emotion will only sit in your body for about 2 minutes unless you hang on to it. So you can be powerfully, powerfully sad for 2 minutes, but if you're not trying to stuff that sadness down or trying to cover it up by forgetting about thinking about something, then it can move through and give you the message that it's meant to give you. The message of whatever thoughts that you're thinking that have generated this emotion are thoughts that are not in agreement with the source within you. And that's the message of those emotions. It's not, if you feel bad, now you're going to be attracting bad things, so you better stop feeling bad. It's feel what you're feeling, feel your feelings, and understand what they're telling you, because they're pointing you in the direction of what you want. Kind of like that game, Hot or Colder, that we used to play as kids,
So when you're colder,
you feel not so good. Discomfort is the beginning of colder. Fear and frustration is ice cold.
So then but I think what you're saying is a nice way of constructing how we perceive our day or perceive our life, that if you're colder, there is still someone there, and that someone is probably you, that's saying hotter, warmer.
Mm-hmm. This way, this direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what are the ways in which you have found to distinguish between pleasure, seeking pleasure, what real pleasure is, and I know that you're really passionate about connecting love and pleasure together, from just pure old hedonism, like just seeking out feeling good, but actually the obsession itself can actually make us feel worse in the long term.
Yeah. So I think for me, the biggest difference there is in the quality of the pleasure, because I consider myself a hedonist quite often. I do follow pleasure purely for the sake of pleasure. And if you pay attention to the quality of pleasure that you're receiving from everything, you'll notice after a time that some things have a deeper aspect of pleasure than others. And so I think what you were hinting at is hedonism that leads to destruction versus pleasure for the sake of pleasure, and how that improves our lives. And hedonism that leads to destruction is not paying attention to the quality of pleasure that they're receiving, because it does diminish. Drugs and alcohol and sex and all of that, there is a lot of pleasure to be had there. And it's not a sustainable kind of pleasure that you can live off of. But feeling that deep connection with yourself is the kind of pleasure that will generate new life force within you on a long-term basis. You know, being able to rise to the occasion and know, to have that confidence in yourself that you're ready for that, that's a whole different kind of pleasure. And that's a sustaining long-term pleasure.
We had a ding at that. Did you hear the ding?
No, I didn't hear the ding. How cool.
There was a ding.
Ding, ding.
Yeah, there was a ding. As some cell phone in the background was agreeing with you at that moment. Tapping again. So it's agreeing with me now too. But what I think is really great about what you were saying is that there's a way that you can seek pleasure that is for yourself and that actually is what you're curating. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you speak more about how you have understood the qualities of pleasure to facilitate self-love?
How I have understood the qualities of pleasure to facilitate self-love. That's a really interesting question, and it's funny because the answer is in part you. Learning in Pilates and all of the embodiment and being connected, being able to feel different parts of my body and to, I don't want to say manipulate, being able to shift to consciously choose a new direction, consciously tweak things in my body, and then to feel the feedback of that. One of the life-changing things that you taught me was about rolling out my feet. And I had never previously noticed that my feet were tight. It just wasn't a thing. I just wore shoes all the time, right? But learning to feel my feet and to let that tension go and to understand what's going on and to know, that use the ball in a certain way, that really connected me to the messages that I was getting from my body. And the messages have been there my entire life. I just, didn't realize that they meant anything. And understanding that signal from my body, and all of the signals that I've been receiving, not just my feet, has been a big part of helping me tap into pleasure and really experience it. Because I think that's one of the things about drugs and alcohol and random sex. Pleasure, yes, hell yes. And it's not as grounded and as permanent of a feeling as the pleasure that I feel from within my body, if that makes sense.
So yeah, you've cultivated, it seems like you've had a lot of practice looking at different systems. Like you have spoken about your love of yoga, you've spoken about your love of EFT, but looking at different systems that actually help you register your body feeling good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And not just feeling good, but helping register what I am feeling. Because that's just as important. It's important to feel what feels good and to revel in that. And it's important to feel what feels off. Because then that's your signal for what to shift.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about that transition that I saw you lay out on one of your websites, Happy Joyful People. That's one of the co-creations you've helped to bring into the world, which I have found really interesting because when I was looking at the different projects, you don't really all the time talk about Radiant Rebecca or you as the lifestyle expert that you're becoming or that you are. There's a lot about your work with collectives. And Happy Joyful People was one of them, where you talked about the transition from understanding the systems that work for you, sticking to them, doing them yourself, and then moving into community situations where those systems are mirrored and amplified. And what I'm curious about is how the work that you've done with the collective, going to self-creation to co-creation, how that has helped you refine or challenged you to get even better at working on your internal state.
Oh yeah, definitely has challenged. And at the same time, the rewards for doing projects as a group, for having that collective energy, are so much more satisfying that it's something that happens pretty easily. It's I like to say, when your why is big enough, you can do anything, you can shift anything. And I think that's one of the reasons why having a visionary leading or sharing what the vision is, and being able to tap into that and feel it and help other people feel it, is so valuable and so important. And that's one of the reasons why so many of the big companies that have been successful in the last couple of decades well, not just decades, but years, are the ones that have someone who is at the top and is able to lead by sharing and inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Do you see yourself as a visionary now?
I do, yeah.
Was there a moment when you realized that was going to be your role, that you weren't going to just be tinkering behind the scenes and helping systems and other businesses, but actually that you were going to be helping people dream a different dream?
A moment? I don't know if there was one moment. There was a moment about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now. I forget. When I was doing Psyche, which is another belief modification modality. And I happened to be in a session, I think it was my very first session ever, and a woman named Mary Alex was facilitating for me. And we had already done 2 balances, and we had a little bit of time left. And she said, "Is there anything else that you want to do?" And I had been reading a book called The Self-Made Billionaire Effect, which is a fascinating book. It's really neat. It's about self-made billionaires and what they have in common, and what perspectives they have that are different from the average person. And as I had been reading that book, I thought, there's a lot of me in here. I feel like maybe I could be this kind of person. So when she said, "We have a few more minutes, do you want to do anything else?" I thought, well, yeah, I want to do something money related. That would be really neat. But I just didn't, we kept asking my body, we do muscle testing with Psyche to say, is it safe and appropriate to balance in this new goal? And so I kept coming up with things like, money comes easily and effortlessly. That'd be a good belief to have, right? So, but my body said, no, don't balance that in. I'm like, what? Why not? That would be a great belief to have. So finally, nothing that I figured would work was working. So I was like, well, why don't we go the other direction? Being a mechanic, why don't we break the system? Why don't we take the biggest possible belief that I can come up with and work backwards from there, right? So I said, I've been reading this book. It's been really interesting. What if we tried this belief of, I am a self-made billionaire? Let's do that, right? Why not? So we tested it, and of course it was weak. I didn't believe it. And then we said, all right, body, is it safe and appropriate to balance in this goal? And my body said, yep. And I was like, what? What the hell? What are you talking about? So we did that, and I remember that my brain shifted significantly. I started having different thoughts right away, which was, it's one of the cool things about Faster EFT and about Psyche, I think, is that the shift can be so dramatic. And when you're someone that is used to paying attention to your thoughts and used to understanding what they mean, it's very obvious, very quick. Mm-hmm. So I would say there wasn't necessarily a moment, but that was the moment when I decided, yeah, I'm going to claim this. I'm going to do this.
And I really liked what you said about thought modification, because it seems like you've taken a pretty top-down approach. Thought first, then, and even the topic of our conversation today is love first. We're not talking about what we're eating and what exercise routine we're doing. Not talking about that. We're talking about actually the beginning of things, which is how high quality are the thoughts that you're thinking, and what can you do, or what, one of the two of the things you recommended are these systems that allow you to go, I'd like this thought that would be a way for me to orient all the rest of my behaviors.
Yes. And to me, that's what makes the most sense. Being an engineer type brain with a lot of creativity built in, and knowing after exploring and testing and having all of these hypotheses that I've tried for myself, knowing how the world works, and that thoughts create feelings, create actions, create results. So it all stems from thoughts. You might as well start there. And the thoughts that we have on a regular basis are created as byproducts of our mental programs, of our beliefs. So beliefs are where it's at.
Right. So what is the biggest belief upgrade you've been going for recently?
Ooh. Yeah. Well, I was going to talk about one that I haven't been doing recently. It was part of my big shift a few years ago, where I realized that when I would get really happy, like I would do something really fun, I'd have an amazing conversation with someone, I'd go outside and I'd be in my favorite place and I'd appreciate it and I'd sit there and write in my journal. When I got that happy, I would always get some kind of money coming in.
Wow.
Like within an hour or 2 hours, something like that. I'd check my email and I'd have a new client who'd like to hire me, or I'd be invited on a trip. I'd be, hey, someone needs you to come and speak over here. Is that okay? And so that belief of when I get happy, I get money has served me really well.
And a nice one for a lot of people to have as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've recently been reading a book called The Gene Keys. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Okay. Highly recommend it. But basically the premise is that each of the 64 components of a strand of DNA has a different psychological component to it in a different state. And one of them is victimization, and the opposite of victimization, the way that victimization gets transformed, is through freedom. So basically each shadow has a potential to transform into a new thing. But one of the really interesting pieces that I was reflecting on was that when one person benefits in a culture of victimization, which is some of our culture, some people believe that things happen to them and they aren't quite in the I'm creating my own world mentality yet. Things happen to me, not things are emerging from me. Or someone who is in a perpetrator mindset where I have to make my way in the world, causing this ripple effect of things not going well. So they could have a personal experience of, man, my life is really great. I'm making so much money, but other people are suffering. And so I'm really curious about what you think about how people can really watch the effect of their own success. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about the transition we have from our personal well-being to the well-being of the others around us.
Yeah, I think that the key to that seems to come from how can I make this a win-win? So yeah, paying attention to the feelings in your body while you're having that success is, to me, the subtlest and fastest way to pay attention to the effect that you're having on others. For instance, if you're going in and doing some kind of work with someone and it feels like exciting, but also has a tinge of I'm getting away with something, you can kind of feel that in your body. It's like, yes.
Yes.
Noticing that in your body can help you give you the opportunity to shift that before it continues. Because if beliefs happen first, then thoughts, then feelings, then your beliefs have created that experience. Your thoughts about it are showing you showing you how you're interacting with that experience, and your feelings in your body are one of the earliest telltale signs of, hey, something's a little off here. What are you going to do about this? This feeling of greed, or this feeling of glee, or this feeling of guilt, whatever it is that's showing up, pay attention to that. And so when something like that does come up, then how could this be a win-win? How could this be a win-win situation? How could they get as much out of it as I'm going to, or more?
And it comes back to this idea of, as you sow, so shall you reap.
Yeah.
So what I've always found interesting is how the inside becomes the outside, becomes the inside again. So if it starts from a place of love and then has a positive effect on others, it actually ends up coming back to you in the end as well, which
Very
is
much.
why it's incentivizing in the first place.
And I've also found that appreciation is currency, basically. So when you can find a place that's a win-win situation for everyone, not only are you going to appreciate it more, which means that the flow is going to be open wider, so there's going to be more currency and more money flowing into your life, but also when everyone else who's involved is winning as well, whether it's the partners that you're working with, the clients that you're working with, the vendors, etc. When they're as happy to be a part of that project as you are, their appreciation energy adds to that as well. So that current, that potential for current, gets wider and bigger and happier. So a win-win solution is actually the most efficient and effective way of being successful.
It feels like the new currency, right?
Yeah.
The currency of gratitude.
Yeah, it is.
And you do have a really big passion for community. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you've watched community develop and where you think community is going.
Where I think community is going. So I have been helping nurture a community in Seattle, the Seattle Abraham-Hicks meetup group, for about 8 years, which I've just turned over to the lovely Nikki O'Brien now. She's running the community. So I feel like I have seen a lot of evolution in that community, in that group. And because they're conscious creators, I think that's made it easier to pick out the patterns of how community is growing and where it could go. And I see over and over again a distancing from, not necessarily from technology, but a distancing from the things that distance us from each other. So the more in alignment people become with themselves, and the more willing they are to do what really feels good to them, it seems like the more they connect with other people and in ingenious ways. So I think the sharing community and the bartering community that's been coming up with, from big companies like Uber and Lyft to smaller things like the Buy Nothing Ballard group, things like that, really help hold people together. And with a similar intention, that group focus can have a really positive impact on the way that everyone who is in that group lives, on the way that they share their lives, on the way that they interact and connect. And so in some ways, it's not really being connected with other people that is the most powerful thing. It's being connected with the right community of people.
I've noticed that as well, that these days it's way more interesting to me to look at the larger conglomerate than just individual people, because the larger conglomerate has more shared ideals. And then there's more potential to build things from that space.
And the other piece, that maybe this is why I've noticed this as well, is there's a tendency to say, this is my best friend, so I'm going to hang out with them all the time. And then when they're not feeling good and you're not feeling good, and then it's kind of whatever. But when you have a community of people that you can draw on and you feel connected to, and you pay attention to who you were inspired to connect with, who you're inspired to have coffee with, what you're inspired to do with them, then the community as a whole will all be growing all together, but everyone will be growing at the level that they're at. And so they'll be interacting with the people that have the most to give them at that time. Whereas if we say, these are my 5 friends, and these are the people that I hang out with, well, when they're on a different spiral of growth than you are, then it feels really awkward and disconnected. And you just don't, you hang out with them because you're supposed to, and then you think, oh gosh, I really wish I'd gone to the baseball game instead, or whatever. So having a community of people whose values are similar to yours and being willing and able to draw from that community, I think, is why community has such a powerful potential for growth for each person in it.
That feels great to hear, because it's a nice refinement. And something else that I've been really curious about and have been pursuing for a period of time is understanding intuition inside the body. So understanding the body's signals. And so recently I've been curious about how you have navigated the yeses and nos and the in-betweens of your body. There's a good friend of mine who says, if it's not a hell yes in the body, don't do it. And I'm curious how you approach those guidance systems inside of you.
I think that's great advice. And I often follow that, not 100% of the time. I usually regret it when I don't. So yeah. But I think that there are times when there's an opportunity in front of us and our body is like, oh, that is so exciting. Yes, go do it. Scary, but exciting and eager, and hell yes. It feels like wild horses couldn't keep you from doing it. And then your brain steps in and goes, yeah, but if you say that to this person now, it's going to scare them away. Or if you do this, we can logic ourselves out of all kinds of things. But especially when I have taken the time to set my vibration in the morning and to be intentional about what I'm wanting to do and where I'm wanting to go, the signals from my body that feel like hell yes it seems like they're always the thing that is the fastest path to what I want. Even though my brain might say, don't do it, I'm scared. So I've really learned to trust that and to do it.
So yeah, you can feel the mixed emotion of a hell yes, but then also feel the brain saying, don't do it. This is the scariest thing in the world.
Oh yeah, but recognizing where it's coming from, right? So someone taught me, so I don't even remember who this was, years ago. They said, whenever you're considering a decision, make sure you ask yourself the question, is this coming from a place of love, or is this coming from a place of fear? So if you're considering going on a trip and it sounds really exciting and all of your cells are going, yeah, we would love that. We would thrive on this, adventure. And part of your brain is going, yeah, but when I come back, I may not have any money left in my bank account. Well, yeah, that's a thought from fear. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, you do want to pay attention to those thoughts. Like I said, those are messages. Those are important. And if you say, well, fear stepped in and is keeping me from moving forward, then you're going to stay stuck for your entire life. So following the messages that come from a place of love, I've found to be so much more productive and fun.
Which brings us back around. What have you learned in, you have a bit of a think outside of the box personality, even though we are very much inside the boxes of our computers and phones and even this call, you're an outside the boxer. And so you have a pretty different perspective on relationships. And I'd be really interested to hear you talk about how you perceive romantic relationships and how
I perceive romantic relationships.
Yes.
I like that. I like that a lot. And yes, I am an outside the box thinker when it comes to relationships. At least I like to think so. when I was 19, I was dating the love of my life, and it was long distance, and we were both in a place of madly in love with each other and wanting to help each other be successful. And we had both gotten to a point where, physically we were just really missing each other and missing touch and missing, the beneficial hormones and bonding and oxytocin that comes from being connected with someone else. And I had been grown up watching Friends, sitcoms and TV shows where the big drama in the show was always about relationships and the fact that someone wasn't supposed to do something and they did something, and then there was guilt, and then there was recrimination, and then there was a consequence, and then things just went to hell. But because it was a sitcom, you could see both sides of the story. You could see that this person needed that and this person needed that, and it was almost a shame that they weren't able to work it out. And so just based on all of that, watching that happen in my personal life with my family and TV shows and in this relationship that I had with this love of my life, we came to the agreement that what if we could do things that were just good for each other? What if we could find a way to have everything that we really needed to thrive? And he was the one who came up with the idea of polyamory. He introduced me to a book called The Ethical Slut, which to this day I still think is a fabulous book and one of the 2 best books on relationships that I've ever read. And in part because it's all about boundaries and all about understanding what you really need and taking radical responsibility for how you show up in a relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or a partnership. That's good advice for everybody that deals with any other human being, knowing how to communicate what's important to you and how to understand what that is within yourself. Because I think that's often the thing that gets us is we have expectations about relationships and the expectations are not shared all the way around. Someone might say, okay, now we're dating, so we've gone out on a couple of dates, which means you don't date anybody else. But they don't come out and say that because they think that's implicit. That's, that's their expectation. So why wouldn't it be yours? And that's just one very common potential for misunderstanding and for miscommunication. So one of the things that I love about polyamory is that it's all about, you have no idea what they expect and what you expect, so you're going to have to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more you uncover those expectations and are able to create a new something for yourself, something that actually fits for both of you.
Mm-hmm. So to me, it feels like you have also a really strong passion for communication. Like making sure that you're understood and that someone else can be understood.
Yeah.
By you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's really powerful. And what do you think the biggest thing you've learned about love from being in a polyamorous kind of configuration has been?
The biggest thing I have learned about love is that it doesn't have an end. Is that in normal relationships, the way we often see them modeled in our society, there's a couple, and then when things are over, they don't like each other very much anymore. Maybe they're okay with each other, and maybe they're raising kids together, and they're not going to go scratch each other's car, but there's still not so much of that adoration left, And in the polyamorous world and in my relationships, I found that that's completely not the case. There are people who I have dated for years who we don't really get to see each other that often, and yet still there's that really deep sensation of appreciation, of adoration of that person. And because the relationships aren't required to be serial, you don't have to stop a new relationship before you can start another one. They can blend in together in a whole new, delicious way, you know. And so to me, that makes transitions of any kind both easier and more beautiful.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So can we take a moment and talk about your work with Wealth for Good? Sure. Yeah. So I'm curious how within this particular system, which I've also looked at as well and participated in, it gives actually an architecture and a shape that I've never seen someone do before, or it basically gives a way of understanding different kinds of people. So how has your understanding of Wealth for Good, or this system, if you can talk a little bit about that, shaped how you work in groups?
Wow. It's had a huge impact. I really haven't worked in teams until about a year ago, until I discovered this. And for the record, Wealth for Good is a name that Marie Ruzicka and I have come up with for one of our joint programs. The original source of the material is the Wealth Dynamics material by Roger Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding, so in order to really communicate with other people, it's helpful to understand how you're different. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about teaching women about men and men about women. Because, well, yes, that's a gross generalization and is not going to be true in every case. It's very helpful to understand the blueprints about what's so different about the way our brains work, the way our thoughts work, the ways that we are raised differently, and the assumptions that we make. So I find the same thing is true when working with a team. In the Wealth Dynamics material, Roger Hamilton has a I can't remember the name of that type of test, but a test that helps discover what your main genius type is, what your personality is. And it goes deeper than just understanding how you interact with the world. It's truly, what is your greatest gift? What is the biggest leverage that you have that you can offer? And so knowing what genius types everyone on the team is, and being able to ask them questions that will help draw out their genius to the best of their advantage and my advantage is always, well, and here I go again, it's always efficient, efficient and effective and productive. But it's also fun. It adds to the richness of the experience, because there is definitely an element of when you're working with someone and they're not suited to the task that you ask them to do, especially if you've grown up in the traditional corporate world where it's not obvious, because everyone has ended up doing things that they weren't really suited to do. So it's just kind of like how the world is. But when you realize that we all have some kind of special genius, some kind of special talent, and when we use it properly, we're fucking superstars. Each and every one of us. Every person who I've had on my team has knocked the socks off of me with something that they've created or added to the project, because that's not something I would have thought of doing. That's not my genius. So being able to rely on them and let them be fully in their own genius and encourage that and model it as well, because I think that's a big piece. If you're not living in your own genius, then it's much more difficult for people around you to say, yes, I'm going to not work on this thing that I think I'm supposed to be working on, and I'm going to go take a walk because that's what my genius really wants me to do. So modeling that kind of freedom and clarity and flow is critical, I think, for anyone who's leading a team.
So if we were going to pull this whole thing together, what is the most, and I'm going to use a word from the Abraham channeling ideas, law of attraction ideas. What's the leading edge for you now? What is evolving for you now? Where is your interest going these days?
Wow. That's a really good question. And I think I will share here. Yeah. So the leading edge for me now is creating a different kind of lifestyle for myself. I've actually had a very dramatic change in mind in the last 2 months about something very important about a life choice. For years, I thought, yeah, I don't think I want to have kids. I'm pretty sure that I'm never going to want children.
Mm-hmm.
I love kids and I love being an aunt, and I think, it's a beautiful, amazing thing, but it just never felt like being a mom was what I wanted. And I still don't think the traditional, nuclear family, mom and dad thing is what I want. But recently I've had some new thoughts about what might actually be fun and exciting. So the leading edge for me is exploring more of that and exploring whether that's really what I want, or whether that's something that my body is nudging me towards that I might decide, yeah, that's not the most authentic version of me. But at the moment, it's looking like there is going to be a baby in my future, and an untraditional, unconventional experience of raising that child.
Right.
So
with probably a lot of love.
A lot of love. Definitely.
There's one thing that you're beginning from now. That seems to be what it is. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Good way to bring in a child to the world. Well, thank you for all the little thought babies that you have shared with us today. We've gone all over the place, from how to structure your day to how to work in groups and how to reform relationships. You're truly an amazing visionary.
Thank you very much.
And is there anything that you want to promote, anything you got going on that you want to share with people?
Well, I do have one thing coming up this weekend. It's Saturday, September 16th at East West Bookshop here in Seattle. And it's a workshop on how pleasure improves us.
Mm-hmm.
So very, very exciting. We'll be talking about all things pleasure and intimacy related, and I'll be sharing some of my news stories of how pleasure has basically, saved my life this year, and how to prioritize your own pleasure and put that into your life every day.
Well, that sounds
be great.
Fantastic, sweetheart. Thank you so much for taking this time and sharing the wisdom that you have.
Thank you.
We look forward to talking and sharing more, and have a wonderful day, blessed day.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to chat with you.
Absolutely. Bye, honey.
Bye.